Long story short, this game is phenomenal. You know what? Cue the montage. I'm not going to do a typical review here. I'm assuming that if you clicked on this video, you at least have some idea of what Borderlands 4 is. I am going to highlight the stuff that I think is important to know if you're on the fence or want to know what this game does differently than other games. If you want to know the basics, this video is unlikely to satisfy you in that respect. We're going to go over 3 categories here: the gainers, the drainers, and improvements I would make to the game. Let's start with the gainers. Enemy variety is amazing. Right out of the gate, level 1, you're going to run into enemies that are dashing around the room. They have personal shields that protect them from a direction. They will come up and melee you or gain some distance to shoot you. This variety only expands as you progress through the game. I couldn't believe it. There's stuff that enemies will put down shield domes to protect other allies. They'll link to each other and share stats. There are some enemies that fly. There are some enemies that are grounded. There are enemies that have specific weak points that need to be hit in order to disable abilities. Some enemies will summon turrets. There are self-destructing sappers, enemies that knock you back, enemies that pull you in, and enemies that have invulnerabilities until you damage specific areas. The way that enemies enter combat is amazing. They'll teleport in just from drop pods, they will come up from the ground, or they will come over from a ship that's flying over and it'll drop some enemies off. Sometimes they're just already populated when you get there. This variety of entrances, and the fact that they're already populated sometimes, means that sniper gameplay is usable when you're approaching, and then once you get closer you can get surrounded by enemies who are just showing up out of nowhere and kind of catch you off guard. This is a great variety for enemy entrances. You're almost immediately given a med kit, and this is one of the best changes they've made to the series. I hated it when I was running around and I would hit a barrel after combat and that explosion would damage me just enough to kill me, and there was no enemies around to shoot to take you out of fight for your life. Those days are pretty much over. Now anytime you take damage out of combat, boom, you just hit the med kit, you're good to go. You can obviously use it in combat as well, and I know what you're thinking. Somebody here is going, but what if I make a tanky character? What if I don't need the med kit? Well, they've thought of this. The devs are on point with this game, and you're going to notice this theme here. There are med kits that instead of giving you health, they'll give you boosts, such as defense boosts or damage boosts. And they take the place of the med kit slot still, but they just don't work to restore your health. This is great if you're playing a tanky character, but you just want some extra damage. Mobility in this game is insane. You start off just being able to sprint, slide, the typical stuff, but right out of the gate you're given a grappling hook. Now the grappling hook can only grab on to specific points as you run around, but you maintain your momentum when you sling past something. And this is compounded by very quickly in the tutorial area, you're given a jetpack. You can combine this grappling hook and this jetpack to float, dash, hover around. You have insane movement ability in and out of combat. The mobility is fantastic. This is really capped off with the fact that now you have a mount that can be summoned at any location. You no longer need to go to a catch-a-ride to do that. You can just pull it up wherever you want. And this is given to you very early in the quest line. Gun variety is also fantastic. Basic weapons are probably one of the most well-done weapon systems in any game I've ever played, and this is not an exaggeration. Early game, they try to not overwhelm you. They give you stuff that you're already familiar with, such as manufacturer types. If you played any of the previous Borderlands, you know exactly what these do. Different manufacturer means it has a different playstyle. Well, as you level up, you will start to get weapons that have different manufactured parts on that weapon, which change how they function. So you can take a weapon that normally is like a melee one that does elemental damage, and if you get a manufactured part for something like Vladoff on a melee one weapon, it may have increased fire rate, or it might get an underbarrel rocket launcher that would be normally only on Vladoff guns, but since it's that part, it can be on any gun. These combinations seems to have almost no limitations. You can pick guns up all the way through your leveling, and it just gets more and more advanced as you go along. Even after 60 hours of play, I'm still running into attachments I have never seen before. Stuff like taser launchers, flamethrowers, deployable mobile cover, and one even had a harpoon that makes a vortex that sucks in all enemies. Some of the later game weapons have up to 4 parts from different varieties of manufacturers. Speaking of weapon variety, they have changed the way grenades work and rocket launchers work. Now they're both categorized under one item called Ordnance. Ordnance is now an equipable slot that includes pretty much heavy weapons, grenades, throwing knives, stuff like that. And these pieces of equipment have no ammo, but they have a cooldown. And after that cooldown, you can fire it so many times, and then you have to wait for the cooldown to come back. There is so much stuff to do in this game. As you're running around, there's the tons of collectibles. These little collectibles are normally just lore, but they can also offer you ammo space in the form of SDUs. Now, that may be something you're interested in, but you might want to ignore it, but there's a lot of other stuff besides just collectibles. There are actually world events as you run around. My friend and I were playing, and we ended up running into this event where the ships were trying to restock at a location, and a timer started when we got there. We had to go up into the ships and try to sabotage as much as we could within the time limit. But at the same time, we could steal some of the materials from inside, but we had to get out of the ship before it took off. Well, as you killed the enemies and destroyed parts of the ship, you would get a score that counted up from, started out as bronze, and it appeared to go up to platinum. And the higher the score was, the better the loot we would get at the end. This event was very fast-paced, and it was incredibly fun. And what's strange to me is it appears, on the Steam achievements at least, that less people have done this event than have beaten the final boss. I don't know if we just got lucky doing this, or if there's just literally that much stuff to do in this game. There are also outdoor bosses. As you run around, you'll just see a giant dome from a distance. You walk into the dome, boom, there's a boss, you kill them, they drop a bunch of loot. There are even side story bosses that are quite compelling, even rivaling some of the main story bosses. Speaking of the story is rather dark, and I prefer this incredibly over the previous installments.
You cannot break free. What devilry?
I know that some people may disagree, you like the quirky nature, but don't worry. Stuff like Claptrap, he's still here, he's still Claptrap.
That was pure voltage! Drinking straight from the hose, baby! Plug me back in! I can go all day!
They just toned it down to where other characters that aren't meant to be comic relief now take themselves seriously. And I think this does a lot to carry the story to where it should be. The good news is, if you really like the quirky, kooky, wacky, silly stuff, the side quests are loaded with that kind of content. So you're getting the best of both worlds. The main story is rather dark and serious, and the side quests are all jokey. On the course of the main story, almost all the NPCs you're going to encounter are original NPCs to this game. And a lot of them are really good. They did an excellent job. Particularly one I would like to shout out is one you run into very early, named Rush.
You hurt? Hungry? Thirsty? Doesn't matter. I got you.
This character is really fleshed out, feels very down to earth, but still has enough funny moments to make it kind of endearing and make you more attached to these characters, even though they haven't been staples of the previous installments in the series.
Conway, this is the third time the hot singles claiming to be nearby weren't actually. Oh, hi.
They did a really good job at introducing new characters and making you want to care about them. There are tons of small things that are just really well done, and I'll just rapid fire them off here. When you finish a quest, loot boxes will appear in your inventory instead of actually taking up inventory space, and then that way you can open the loot box whenever you're in a comfortable spot. When you finish the campaign, there is a campaign skip and an instant level 30 boost for new characters that you make. There are target dummies with adjustable values to help you check your DPS. Enemies no longer drop skins. This was a super huge nuisance in Borderlands 3, where you'd see legendary drops all over the place, but then you would realize it was a skin that you've already collected. Now all skins are earned through challenges and side quests. You can pay in-game currency to respawn a boss and fight them again. Now let's talk about the drainers. Huge, undeniable issue here. Performance. The game runs like crap. It will crash every 2 hours on the dot. As of the time of this video, it is still not fixed. Often playing online will have constant micro lag that causes issues with aiming and hit registration, and you will struggle to drive around when you're spread too far apart. This was both on PC and crossplay co-op. The inventory is a mess. It's not very easy to navigate. The menus don't register properly when you do sorting inputs, and they don't stay at what you had listed them as. As you're going through your inventory, you're going to realize that sometimes it will mark things you don't intend to mark, and this can be extremely frustrating and cause you to accidentally get rid of a piece of gear that you don't want to get rid of. The game is completely open world, which means you can do the zones in any order that you want after you hit a certain point in the story, but it seems to nudge you in a specific direction. I think the narrative suffers if you do the story in the game's suggested order. When you hit the branching path, the story will suggest to you to do it in this order.
Idolater Soul, Vile Lictor, and Callous. Though she's a bit more complicated.
I would suggest to you to do it in the order of Callous, Idolater Soul, and then Vile Lictor.
I can derelict my own balls.
There are certain story beats that once they're revealed will change the way the plot is perceived, and I think encountering these things too early kind of ruins how the ending is going to be. Enemy scaling is out of control at certain points during the campaign. Overall, playing through the whole thing, rarely ran into problems. Most enemies were like 1 or 2 levels around my level, but once I got to the end, something went wrong, and the scaling just burst through the roof. All enemies were exclamation marks. I couldn't even see their level. When you play with other players in co-op, the game doesn't save your map progress in your own game, which means whoever's hosting gets the most benefit. And if you're in co-op playing as a secondary player, you're going to have to go back and rediscover the whole map by yourself. Quests do update. If there's something that you've done, it will update, but you still have to explore the map and reveal the area where you've done those quests. This is frustrating for trying to figure out what you have and haven't done. Even though it's not the biggest inconvenience, you don't really have to redo everything. It's still inconvenient enough that I think it needs to be mentioned here. The campaign skip is kind of a monkey's paw issue, where skipping the campaign, getting an instant level 30 is quite nice, but it doesn't carry over Guardian ranks, and it doesn't carry over your SDUs. So now you have to go and redo basically every side quest and collectible, and you're going to have to grind those Guardian ranks back up. This is not very fun, and I argue it's harder than doing the campaign. In-game viability is where this game starts to become a huge problem. The skills that characters have are fantastic until you start trying to really get into the nitty-gritty. There are massive issues with the way certain stuff functions just based on the dialogue. It doesn't match what you think it does, or some things may just be overly balanced in a particular direction. A good example of this is Amon has a skill called Warrior's Cup that says every time you use your med kit, it will restore some of your action skills duration. I decided to take this with a med kit that had 2 charges, hoping that I could use it twice to restore my durability, my duration to my action skill. But whenever I would use the med kit, it would consume both charges, so either it's bugged or it's balanced around this interaction. But the problem is, if it doesn't work the way the tooltip describes, it's not as powerful as it may seem. And this type of troubleshooting is something you're really going to have to go through at the end game. This is not a problem going through the campaign. But at the end game, this type of issue pops up on quite a few things. The other half of it is stuff like melee viability. There's a lot of melee trees in this game, and there are a ton of enemies that fly, bosses fly, you have a ton of skills that go with melee. There are items that support melee, and when you melee, you cannot shoot your gun during that time, and it interrupts your firing. It interrupts your reloading. So you're in this position where meleeing is extremely clunky. Not going to say it doesn't work, I'm just going to say you have to be very in tune with how the game functions to figure this out. This kind of problem also crops up with guns. The guns parameters that they show in the preview are not very clear. DPS is almost completely irrelevant, and it's all about how some of these guns function. A gun can have half the DPS in the tooltip, but do double the DPS once you actually use it, just based on what skills you have and how the gun actually functions. It's very strange, and basically means you're going to need to go through a significant amount of thought and experimentation in order to learn what weapons work for which characters and which skills work for which characters, especially if you're not looking up a guide. Another huge issue is that visual clarity is terrible. Aiming down sights is really bad. Most weapons have insane recoil, especially if they're rapid fire, and they have clunky and overwhelming sights on the weapons. This makes hip firing vastly superior, but it only gets worse when you combine it with character skills. Character skills like Harlow and Amon, realistically all of them, they can clutter your whole screen up. I was playing with a Vex that had a pet, and the pet has like a tornado going around it. You can't see any of the enemies inside of the tornado. When you're playing as Amon, you can hold up a shield, and the shield blocks your view. It's very difficult to see, and what makes it even worse is you need to aim down sights in order to make the visibility of the shield not get worse. It will get worse if you don't do that. So now you're zoomed in, you can barely see, everything's obstructed. There are just so many effects going on. It is so difficult to tell what the hell is going on in this game. Now let's talk about improvements. You need to be able to grapple flying enemies to force them to the ground. There's already mechanics that allow you to grapple onto enemies, to pull like a shield off of them or rip them out of the ground. You should be able to do the same thing to a flying enemy. This would dramatically improve the difficulty of fighting flying enemies. It would also allow you to take advantage of a melee build. They need to make it to where in-game missions have a % amount, just like on the events, to where when you kill a certain amount of enemies, the reward increases. Right now, you can practically run to the end of the mission and fight the boss and just get the loot and get out of there. There's no reason to stop and kill all the enemies along the way. I think they need to give you some incentive to fight the smaller enemies. They need to nerf the crit knife. Early on in my gameplay, it's probably about level 16 or so, I found a knife that guarantees all damage to be crits for the next 5 seconds. It's an ordnance slot, so you can just constantly throw it as long as it's cooling down while you're shooting the whole time. You throw this, all types of crits are popping up, your weapons are just significantly more overpowered, so anything that scales crit damage just goes through the roof in value because you can guarantee the crits. There's a ton of skills that work off of when you crit this happens, and this just causes builds to get out of control. I know it's probably what a lot of people don't want to hear, but this needs to be nerfed into the ground. I would almost argue it needs to be removed outright, because I think it's bottlenecking a bunch of builds. Guardian ranks need to be shared between all the characters. I don't know why they did it this way, but I can understand if they don't want you to unlock stuff too early because it can trivialize some content, but there at least needs to be some form of catch-up. Make it to where after I complete a certain number of quests, or like get to a checkpoint, I can gain some boosts. Like, make me gain 10 Guardian ranks, and then I'll gain 20% of what my top character has. And then if I get another 10, I'll get another 20% of the top character until I can eventually catch up. There needs to be some way to equalize that, because right now, I feel discouraged from playing a new character.
I think I'm stuck here.
Before anybody says anything, if you haven't seen them, some of the Guardian rank abilities are insanely strong. Playing without them is a totally different game. And last but not least, the soundtrack needs some major improvement, needs some love. And what I would suggest here is they get Jesper Kyd back on the payroll. Jesper Kyd did the soundtrack for the Borderlands pre-sequel. Now this guy is off doing the Dark Tide soundtrack. He's an amazing composer. Just get him back in here. The soundtrack on Borderlands 4 is very plain. There's a couple tracks. It honestly feels like there's like 5 tracks in this entire game. You barely hear the music. Overall, this game is phenomenal. If it cleaned up a few problems and got rid of the technical issues, I would confidently say this is one of the best games we've had in the last decade. The good news is that the problems are so outweighed by the positives that I would still highly recommend this game. Borderlands 4 is the best in the series, and I can't wait to see what they bring in the future.
You are done speaking.